The Last Prescription of Dr. Benedict Ashworth. Dr. Benedict Ashworth had been writing prescriptions for 31 years, and he had never once written one for himself. This was, his colleagues agreed, both his greatest virtue and his most spectacular flaw. He was 62, silver-haired, with the kind of face that made frightened patients immediately less frightened. Steady, unhurried, carved by decades of listening. He worked at a modest GP practice in Keswick, in the Lake District, where the mountains pressed close to the town like old friends leaning in for conversation. He had delivered babies, held the hands of the dying, talked anxious mothers down from ledges of worries so high they'd forgotten what solid ground felt like. He had never married. He said he'd simply never found the time, which everyone understood was not quite the whole truth. The trouble began, or rather was finally noticed, on a Tuesday in February when Dr. Ashworth forgot the name of a patient he had treated for 19 years. It was only for a moment. Mrs. Dorothy Callahan, 78, rheumatoid arthritis, a fondness for crosswords, and a distrust of margarine. The name came back within seconds, sliding back into place like a book returned to a familiar shelf. He smiled, asked about her granddaughter, wrote her prescription with his usual neat hand. But his own hand, he noticed, had trembled slightly before he began. He said nothing. He was a doctor. He knew exactly what a trembling hand and a momentary lapse in a 62-year-old's could mean, and the knowing sat in his chest like a cold stone all afternoon. Over the following months, he watched himself with the clinical detachment he had always applied to others. He was scrupulously honest in his observations. A word lost here, a name surfacing slowly like something rising from deep water. A morning, just one, when he stood in his kitchen for a full minute, unable to remember whether he had taken his blood pressure tablets. He continued to work. He told no one. His nurse, a sharp and loyal woman named Sister Margaret Foley, noticed the way he sometimes paused mid-sentence and the way his desk had grown slightly less orderly than its usual immaculate self. She said nothing either, because she was waiting for him to speak first, and she was patient in the way that only people who have worked alongside suffering tend to be. It was a child who changed everything. His name was Theo Ashworth, no relation, just a coincidence that made Benedict smile every time the boy came in. He was 7, asthmatic, bright as a struck match, and utterly unafraid of doctors in the way that some children simply aren't. He came in one October afternoon with his mother, following a mild episode the night before, and while his mother spoke, Theo looked around the consulting room with calm, forensic curiosity. His eyes settled on the framed photograph on the bookshelf, the only personal item Benedict kept in the room. A black and white image of a man standing at the summit of Scaffold Pike, arms wide, laughing into the wind, young, unrecognizable, electric with joy. "Who's that?" Theo asked, pointing. "That," said Benedict, "is me, about 1,000 years ago." Theo studied it seriously. "You look really happy." "I was," Benedict said, and then, before he could stop himself, "I was absolutely terrified and completely alive." Theo nodded, as though this made perfect sense. "My dad says those are the same thing." Benedict looked at the boy for a moment. Then he looked at the photograph. Then he looked at his own hands folded on the desk, perfectly still. "Your dad," he said quietly, "is a very wise man." He referred himself the following morning. He sat in a consulting room not unlike his own, on the other side of the desk for the first time in 3 decades, and answered the questions of a younger colleague with the same honesty he had always demanded of his own patients. The tests were arranged. The waiting began. That particular waiting that doctors are both best and worst equipped to endure, knowing too much and feeling it all the same. The diagnosis, when it came, was not the one he had feared most. Early stage, manageable, a condition of the small vessels of the brain that responded well to treatment and lifestyle changes, and crucially, to rest. Not a death sentence, not even a career sentence necessarily, though changes would need to be made. Hours reduced, responsibilities shared. He sat with this information for a long time. Then he rang Sister Foley. "I know," she said before he had finished his second sentence. "You knew?" "I've worked with you for 16 years, Benedict." She was one of only 3 people on Earth permitted to use his first name. "I was waiting for you to catch up." He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that loosens something long held tight. He did not retire. He reduced his hours, accepted a junior partner, began walking in the mornings along the lake before the town awoke. He found, to his surprise, that he was a rather good patient, once he'd stopped being a terrible one. On his last full day before the reduced schedule began, he saw 22 patients. He was thorough, warm, unhurried as ever, and for each one, without quite knowing why, he found himself listening slightly more carefully than usual, to the pauses between words, to the things not quite said. Dorothy Callahan came in for her regular review. As she was leaving, she stopped at the door and turned back. "You look well, doctor. Different, but well." "I feel different," he admitted. She smiled the smile of a woman who had lived long enough to recognize grace when she saw it arrive, even in plain clothes. "That's usually how it starts," she said. That evening, Benedict Ashworth drove to the foot of Scafell Pike, sat on a low stone wall, and looked up at the mountain in the last of the autumn light. He did not climb it. He was not ready for that. Not yet. Perhaps not ever again. But he took out a small notebook, the same kind he used for clinical notes, and on the first clean page he wrote a single line. Referred to self, finally. Prognosis, good. He considered it for a moment. Then, with the careful, deliberate hand of a man who had spent a lifetime writing prescriptions for everyone but himself, he signed it. Dr. B. Ashworth, date, today, at last.